It's now 60 years after the John F. Kennedy assassination, and to this day, you still get the same old standard interpretations of what happened and why this happened. So you get the mainstream opinion, which basically says that this lone nut idiot just shot the president, and there was no conspiracy of any kind. And because there was no conspiracy, this then means that the United States establishment is fine and dandy. Everything's okay. There's no big problems with the American upper classes, But this interpretation makes absolutely no sense. Even if it was just a lone nut that shot the president, this does not automatically mean there are no real significant problems with the American upper classes. So never ever fall for this scam, no matter how the assassination actually went. Because it didn't make any real difference who was president at the time. It was John F. Kennedy, could have been somebody else. It's always the same. There's no real difference there. And if Kennedy had not been assassinated, it would have been business as usual. That's just what it is. So the assassination really didn't change anything about the American system itself. So the only thing that really had an effect was these interpretations about the assassination. So you get the standard narrative, everything's fine, because there's no conspiracy, everything in total is fine. Then you get the leftist interpretation, which says that he was a hero and he became a martyr and he wanted to save America and he was having such a great effect internationally. He wanted to prevent war, end war, and help the people and all the good stuff. But the bad, evil, right-wing world conspiracy killed him. So never forget that, leftists are also very, very much into conspiracy mythology. So this is something they would never, ever admit, but they do believe in a right-wing world conspiracy, and they are very incompetent about understanding these things. On the surface, they see confirmation everywhere, and they think this is totally obvious, but of course it's way more complicated than that. So by creating this myth, by creating this martyr mythology, the left wanted something out of it. So they create this, they blow up this balloon of hot air, and then they want to use it for their advantage. They claim they have something of value, and then they want to gain political capital from that. And then you get the standard baseline conspiracy narrative, which basically says that Kennedy was a hero. He was going to save America, potentially the world, because he was fighting the Jewish bankers and the Illuminati, and he wanted to change the money system, and he declared war against the Illuminati in a speech, which is utter complete nonsense, right? So again, baseline conspiracy influencers, they use this narrative to further their own careers, to further their own, reputation. And you can expect that from any sort of, major death by a popular figure. So at some point, Donald Trump is going to be too old. He's going to have like a stroke or a heart attack, whatever. Other, politicians die, have accidents, whatever. But every time you will see the same people giving their interpretation and saying it's this kind of a conspiracy, and that's why we tell you what to do, and then, things are going to be great. So this is basically what's been happening ever since the assassination. And there have been 21 major assassinations or assassination attempts in United States history. So this was targeting Garfield, McKinley, Andrew Jackson, Lincoln, Roosevelt, Hoover, Franklin Roosevelt, Truman, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Clinton, Taylor, Harding, etc. So these things sometimes just happen. Presidents implement policies, especially foreign policy, and that creates victims, and they want revenge, or their relatives want revenge. This is just how it goes. Kennedy was a very, very normal president, and also his brother, serving in the administration. They're very, very baseline, very normal. There was no clear motive for the upper classes to kill Kennedy or the Kennedys. There was no clear motive, and there would have been much better ways to remove them from politics. Way more elegant, without creating a big fuss, creating big drama. And then we have the conspiracy narrative, focusing on an old executive order by Kennedy regarding money and silver. Now, this was a meaningless executive order that wasn't supposed to change anything major, but it's been misinterpreted as the attempt to destroy the central bank, the Federal Reserve, and to create new money and, just destroy the power of the Jews who supposedly run the Federal Reserve. Even though every central bank in America, right now we have the third one, every central bank was just a baseline institution modeled after the Bank of England, which was also not in the hands of the Jews. This is all just fairy tales. There was no attempt to fight the central bank. And then there's a speech that is being quoted again and again and again. This was from 1961. Kennedy was talking in front of newspaper publishers. And Kennedy was warning about the Soviet threat. And Kennedy talked about a worldwide, monolithic, ruthless conspiracy, covert means, covert operations, this and that, and this and that. So he was talking about Soviet communism. And the speech was supposed to strike the balance between freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and just protecting against Soviet influence, because there had been significant leaks in the press against U.S. government operations. And pretty much after that speech, or around the time of that speech, Kennedy used the CIA against the newspapers to find the leaks, which was illegal, but that's just how things went. So this was not a speech about the Illuminati or the Jewish bankers or the world conspiracy. It was just a speech about Soviet communism. So you don't find anything anywhere. You don't find anything where Kennedy was, where Kennedy was talking about the traditional view of a world conspiracy and wanting to fight that. Nothing. I mean, if there had been texts like this or speeches like this and recordings like this, you can bet conspiracy media would have quoted that all the time. But it doesn't exist. That's why they're still quoting this little bit out of from a speech about Soviet communism, and then lie to the audience and say he was declaring war against the Illuminati. So these conspiracy influencers, they're lying to their audience, or they're so stupid and incompetent, they can't even figure out what he was talking about. So, Kennedy, Kennedy didn't have the intent to fight some big conspiracy in the establishment. He didn't have the means. He didn't have the health. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So then, let's talk about his father for a moment here. Joseph. Joseph was making millions with stocks. And he was working for Hayden Stone & Co., and they did some shady business dealings. The market wasn't as regulated yet. They did stuff that was, later defined as insider trading and market manipulation. But, he was from the establishment, and he had all these connections, and he was, he came from the big universities, so he was safe. He made his millions. On September 16th, 1920, he almost died at the Wall Street bombing. This was a terror attack. 40 deaths, hundreds of injured people. So was this an act by the Illuminati? No, this was probably Italian communists and anarchists, because they hated, the banking and the system. So this is just the reality. Maybe Kennedy could have died that day, the old Kennedy. And Joseph apparently knew about the coming stock market crash, of 1929, and he transferred his assets to real estate, and he made a killing, while many others went broke. In 1937, Joseph became the ambassador for the United Kingdom, which means he must have had an intelligence background. He must have had, connections, secret societies, all that stuff. Otherwise, you cannot become a diplomat, especially not for the United Kingdom. And he was close to Chamberlain in Britain. He was also friends with Nancy Astor, and Astor was she was hosting a very problematic group called the Clifton Set, ultra-rightwing, and among this group was Oswald Mosley, who was a fascist leader in Britain. And he was also totally connected to the high nobility and their intelligence networks, which are very old and very large and very powerful. Kennedy tried multiple times to arrange personal meetings with Adolf Hitler and, people from America and Britain. And it seems the old Kennedy was very anti-Semitic. Yeah, and so Harvey Clemmer, who was also working at the embassy, Clemmer was telling these stories about Kennedy, how he, called Jews names, and apparently Kennedy said that some Jews are okay, but as a whole, the race is terrible. And Kennedy also voiced his opinion that, the Jews are to blame for the prosecution of Jews in Germany. Kennedy was meeting with the German diplomat Herbert von Dirksen. And according to Dirksen, Kennedy said supposedly, the problem is not the persecution of Jews. That's not the problem for the Nazis. The problem is the Nazis are too loud about it. So that was that. And Kennedy was not just talking to the Germans that way. He was talking that way to Charles Lindbergh. He was talking that way to Viscountess Astor. He was communicating with Astor on a regular basis, and they considered themselves to be anti-communist. They considered themselves to be pro-Hitler. They wanted to solve the world problems, meaning the Jews and communism, and so on and so forth. And ultimately, this ruined Kennedy's career as a diplomat. And decades later, historians such as Lou Kilzer found out there was a large-scale deception maneuver back in the day against the Nazis. So mainly Britain wanted to pretend to be open for an alliance with the Nazis. But there was no real such intent. The Brits were just faking that. And to fake that, the Brits had to use anti-Semitic, statements. And one of the main people involved in this deception was Winston Churchill. And Churchill was the one who publicly had praised Nesta Webster's conspiracy books. So then Joseph Kennedy wanted to build up his sons to, put them into important positions and maybe even turn one of them into the president of the United States. And Joseph Kennedy was connected to Joe McCarthy, who was hunting the communists, and McCarthy was hiring the 27-year-old Robert F. Kennedy. So that was that. Robert at some point was arguing with McCarthy's assistant Roy Cohn, who then became a mentor for Donald Trump. So they didn't all get along too well. And so you had John, Robert, and Ted. So these were the projects of the old Joseph Kennedy. Initially, the big hope was the oldest son, Joseph Jr., but he died in the war. And Joseph Jr. was also a fan of Adolf Hitler. So in 1934, Joseph Jr. was visiting Nazi Germany, wrote a letter to his father praising Hitler's policy of forced sterilizations. So it was supposedly a great thing to get rid of terrible humans. And Kennedy was also saying Hitler was fomenting a spirit that was enviable, among these men. So if Joseph Jr. had survived the war, he may have become a very powerful politician, maybe even president, if they could have managed to smooth over his, Hitler sympathies from the past. So he could have been president. A Hitler fan could have become president of the United States of America. So then the focus was on John F. and Robert F. Kennedy. John became president of the Democratic Party, and Robert also became very important in the administration. And Robert was also fighting the mafia and made himself many, many enemies in that field. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was thinking that Robert was going overboard. He was, too much against the mafia. And what Kennedy probably didn't know was that certain mafia families had arrangements with the CIA and other organizations. And this goes back to Second World War, where Italian mafia groups, for example, were helping the Americans in places like Sicily and others. Robert was preaching, about the threat of the mafia, and he was pooling all these government resources to fight organized crime. You saw 8 times more convictions against mafia people. So he had enough enemies, people who wanted to kill him. So later, when Robert wanted to become president, he was shot by the 24-year-old Palestinian Sirhan Sirhan. Sirhan said that he hated Kennedy, so a 20-year-long hatred. And this was tied to the foundation of the State of Israel, and the Kennedys were very supportive of Israel, and so on and so forth. So that was a possible motive for Sirhan Sirhan. Now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and others contemplated there may have been a second shooter. There's some interesting background into all of this. Sirhan was apparently a communist. He had brain damage from his earlier days, and he was also an esoteric Rosicrucian. So there's lots of weirdness there. So lots of crazy people out there with certain ties and, motives to kill one of the Kennedys. That's just it. So in 1941, John F. Kennedy joined the United States Naval Reserve, and this was supported by the director of the Office of Naval Intelligence. So there was already an intelligence connection there. In 1943, John F. Kennedy was served on a patrol boat in the Pacific. So JFK was in combat. He was in the middle of the action. Supposedly, he saved his fellow soldiers, and he was given the most prestigious medals the military has to offer. It's always questionable when somebody from a powerful family, gets these recommendations and these medals. Could have been manipulated. That's just how this thing goes, oftentimes. And but JFK was regarded as a war hero, and this helped him in his political career. And he was a baseline politician, JFK. So he was trying to contain the Soviet Union, all the, normal methods. He supported the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, which demanded that communists register with the government, and he was also lamenting the loss of China to communism. He wasn't the loudest anti-communist, but he was pretty clear. And in 1947, Kennedy was giving a speech in Congress. He demanded money for Italy to fight the communists, and as we know now, suitcases full of cash were handed around in Italy and other countries in Europe. Were handed to pro-Western, political parties, even fascists. So, especially in Italy, you had fascist circles, you had the Vatican involved, you had the mafia involved. But this was billed as anti-communism, so this is just how this went. And and this anti-communism also involved, the Middle East, Asia, so on and so forth. And so Kennedy was doing the normal thing, just containing the Soviet Union. And as a president, he was furthering this very normal agenda. So instead of warning about the military-industrial complex, like Eisenhower did, he was expanding the production of nuclear weapons. There was a 50% increase in nuclear weapons. 50% increase between 1961 and 1964. And also, there were more B-52 bombers. So this was Kennedy, right? He wanted a significant increase of military spending. He wanted 200,000 more soldiers, and so on and so forth. There was also a coup in Iraq against this character Qasim, because Qasim wanted to, reclaim the oil there and, just push out the Anglos. And of course, the Anglos then were involved in a coup against Qasim. So the Qasim government fell. Kennedy government was happy about that and sold weapons to the new government in Iraq. So again, this was something that created more enemies for the Kennedys. People wanted revenge. The Kennedy administration was full of insiders, very normal for an American administration. Ted Sorensen was supposed to be CIA director at some point. McGeorge Bundy, national security advisor, very powerful. Arthur Schlesinger from the intelligence world. C. Douglas Dillon from the bank. His friend Nicholas Brady became Secretary of Treasury under Reagan and Bush Sr., and so on and so forth. Was Robert McNamara, who worked for the Ford Motor Company once. Dean Rusk, he was a Rhodes Scholar in Oxford, and on and on and on. So Kennedy's hesitating stance on the Vietnam situation did not mean he was a big fan of peace and he wanted to avoid war and he wanted to rebel against the United States establishment and he wanted to destroy the CIA and he wanted to destroy the military-industrial complex. No, there were many people who didn't quite know what to do with Vietnam, and Kennedy was planning to be involved in Vietnam, not too much, not too little, so very baseline policy there. Then, November 22nd, 1963, JFK gets shot in Dallas, Texas. Open limousine. Some of these security measures were not really in place that much. 10-mile long route, very winding. So that was, of course, easier to shoot JFK there. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested. He said he was innocent, and then Harvey Oswald got shot himself. So Oswald's father was a cousin of US President Theodore Roosevelt, but Oswald was a difficult child, average intelligence, narcissistic and schizoid tendencies, violent tendencies. Didn't get a school degree, thought he was a communist, and joined the US Marines. He was an above average soldier, but he got into trouble because of his difficult character. So then, shortly before his 20th birthday, he decides he wants to go to the Soviet Union. He learned a little bit of Russian, saved some money, and went to Russia, went to the Soviet Union, and they really didn't want him. So he created a scene, and they let him stay, but they didn't know what to do with him. He wasn't valuable to them. He wanted to study at the Moscow University, even though he was unqualified to do so. So instead, the regime put him to Belarus and put him in a factory to work there. And he hated the actual socialism. The work was boring, the money was bad, and there was nothing to buy with the money. There were no cool things you could buy, and there were no fun activities. So he moved back to the United States with his new wife and his kid. And then he was moving in circles, in America, of people with a background in Russia or Eastern Europe. So maybe he was informing on these circles. Maybe he was a spy or a snitch for communist intelligence. That's one of many possibilities. And Oswald also became acquainted with George de Mohrenschildt. He was quite an interesting character. Soviet defector Ion Pachepa is convinced de Mohrenschildt was KGB, but de Mohrenschildt and his brother, they also had Western intelligence connections, so it's really not clear what was going on there. The Warren Commission said that Oswald had attempted another assassination. It was supposed to kill the military officer, or retired military officer Edwin Walker. And Walker was fairly right-wing. He was a member of the John Birch Society, which controlled conspiracy media at the time to a large degree. And supposedly Oswald fired his rifle at this guy, but it was not a successful assassination. So then it seems as if Oswald tried to infiltrate some Cuban groups in America, and wasn't really successful in doing so because he wasn't intelligent, he was not a good spy, and wasn't good at anything. And then Oswald came to Mexico City, and he wanted to visit Cuba and the Soviet Union. This is all very weird, and it's not exactly clear if he really went to these... if he really went to this embassy, or if some imposter went there. It's not exactly clear. So it's conceivable that American intelligence sent somebody else to have something against Oswald. Many possibilities. The FBI the FBI started to notice Oswald. They thought he was a potential spy, potential little terrorist, radical. Nothing major. That's kind of what the FBI thought. And so, then the FBI was asking around in Oswald's circles, and Oswald was angry about that. He confronted FBI people and supposedly threatened them. And so on and so forth. So when the assassination happened, and when the investigations started, there was quite a bit of chaos. And it seems like certain things were covered up in the investigation, but you have to look precisely what was covered up and why. Because as we've seen, the United States establishment did not have a motive to kill Kennedy. Made no sense. This was a very normal president. And even if there was a motive, there would have been, way more elegant options to put Kennedy out of circulation, to get him out of the White House. But still, why would the government cover up aspects of the assassination? Well, to prevent outrage in the population, maybe to prevent people going nuts. Because if enough right-wingers believe that this was a left-wing assassination, this could create some incredible tensions in the United States society. And also, if people knew too much about Oswald's Soviet connections, this could become really, really dangerous. This could become an international problem. And so it's clear from the proceedings that the United States system, the United States government was worried about that. They didn't want people to blame the Soviets too much, and the Soviets were afraid. They didn't want to get blamed for this assassination. And ultimately, what motive did the Soviets have? Kennedy was a normal president, and so he Kennedy would be replaced with another very normal U.S. president with no benefit for the Soviet Union whatsoever. And if anything leaks about Soviet involvement, this would make the Soviet Union look terrible and would weaken their position. So there was enough, motive to cover up certain things, surely. But you cannot lose track of the main aspects of the case and the main aspects of the story. You have so many people with a clear motive to kill the Kennedys, to take revenge, and this is fairly common in American history, that people try to kill a president and take revenge for certain policies, that even foreign policies that leave people dead or in prison or get people tortured and whatnot. So maybe Oswald was maybe Oswald was an idiot. He was just schizoid. He was narcissistic. He wanted to be important. He wanted to take revenge. And maybe he got involved with different groups that hated America, hated the government. He saw his opportunity. He was relevant enough to gain connections to groups, but he was not relevant enough to really appear on the radar that much of the FBI, for example. And they thought he was a nobody, he was an idiot. And so maybe that was kind of the perfect storm, so to say. And he managed to, get his rifle, shoot the president, and that was that. So the assassination did not really change the American system. John F. Kennedy was not saving anything. He was not doing anything unusual. This is not what this is about. It's more like what the effect was of the assassination on different groups out there. So that's why you saw different groups jumping on the occasion and promoting these narratives and trying to benefit from these narratives. And so to this day, this method is being used. So at some point, Donald Trump is going to be too old. Trump may have a heart attack. He may have an aneurysm. Trump may have a stroke or whatever. And what's going to happen? People will claim this was an assassination by this group and that group, and therefore people have to get mad and do something stupid or vote a certain candidate and whatever. Do not fall for this stuff, right? Trump didn't change anything. As ludicrous as he was as a person, and impossible to work with and whatnot, it was all in all a fairly normal administration, in terms of policy, in terms of the overall structure of America and what the different branches of government were doing and the military intelligence agencies were doing. So forget the theatrics for a moment. Trump didn't change anything. And this is just what people have to realize. And nowadays, people still misinterpret the JFK assassination. They also claim the same stupid stuff about the Lincoln assassination. Lincoln was against the bankers and he wanted to save us from the banking conspiracy. And there's many false things that are being told about that story, and then these stories are linked together. So because of Lincoln, then, same reasons for JFK and the same reasons behind a possible assassination of, Donald Trump, even though Donald Trump is irrelevant to the overall system. Okay, so don't fall for these standard narratives. Try to focus on the importance of a case. And be aware that, there's always problems in a system. Like, for example, the American system. You got high-ranking moles. You have people with their own agenda. You have problematic circles and networks that shouldn't exist in America. Old British networks in America, like Skull and Bones, and so on and so forth. So there's enough things to do. Counterintelligence. Just get these problematic people out of power. And have good networks and have transparency and make people smarter. So people are more interested in intelligence matters, and people read books or listen to audiobooks. This can really improve America. You cannot improve America or save America with these baseline narratives, such as the ones spread around about JFK. So please comment on this video. What do you think about the whole case? Like this video, share it, and of course, subscribe to this channel. And don't forget, we also have my first English book out about old intelligence networks in America. Really important stuff. Check this out. You can find the link in the description below.